Welcome back. This is World Insight. United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will visit Japan and South Korea this week. Blinken and Austin are expected to be on a mission to take up issues that they have already touched upon in phone calls with their Japanese and Korean counterparts. Those include the strengthening alliances and the push to denuclearize the DPRK. Blinken will return from Seoul to the United States and join Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, for talks in Anchorage with their Chinese counterparts. And what does the Biden administration's Asia policy mean to the region? Let's loop in our panelists. For more, in New York, Daniel Russell, Vice President for International Security and Diplomacy with the Asia Society Policy Institute. And in Seoul, Yoon-Jung Lim, the Associate Professor and Director of the Office of International Affairs and Public Relations with Kongji National University. Last but not least, in Shanghai, Wu Xinbo, Director of the Center for American Studies with Fudan University. Ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to see you. It's going to be a big week for Asia. Mr. Russell, what can be achieved?
It is a big week, and it builds on the first ever summit of the Quad, the four leaders who met late last week. These are democratic partners in the Indo-Pacific, and I think what's interesting is they focused on solutions, on getting things done. So specifically, how they can support Southeast Asian countries sharing vaccines and climate and tech working groups and so on. And lastly, I'd say the fact that they've scheduled a meeting with their Chinese counterparts, that is to say, the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken. I think it shows that the emphasis that the Biden administration has placed on allies and partners and other democratic governments doesn't mean that they intend to exclude China or to ignore China. So there is a lot going on.
Right. Professor Wu, from China's perspective, is it about rallying the allies against China together?
Well, at least that shows that Biden wants to reach out to allies and partners before sitting down with China. So this coincides with his overall line of thinking that the U.S. should deal with China from a position of strength. Of course, it's a different question whether allies, partners, they will just follow the U.S. When it comes to the China policy. That's a different issue.
All right. Well, you kicked the ball beautifully already to the court of Ms. Yoon-Jung Lim. Ms. Lim, I have to go to you about that.
Again, this visit is more than just meaningful. Our biggest concern was what if the new administration, new Biden administration, is just almost obsessed with the domestic affairs, and what if they don't have enough energy to make enough commitment in this region, because other regions too, for example, Middle East, or these days Myanmar situations is very bad too, and that they have to take care of their European partners as well. So our concern, one of the biggest concern was what if again that they less prioritize this region. As long as that was our major concern, I think not only just Seoul, of course Tokyo, partner countries here in these regions are, I think, excited and welcoming this visit. Again, this does not necessarily mean that we are trying to make something, very against the China, but still we need to coordinate, and still we need to narrow down our already widened gap, especially between Tokyo and Seoul, Seoul and Tokyo.
Professor Wu, one of the things people have been talking about here in China is wondering whether the common ground, so-called, between the United States and some of the allies, such as South Korea and Japan, is about, China, or what the U.S. would call so-called assertive China, and then nuclear issue, for example, concerning the DPRK, and then also the pandemic, whether China has become a common topic among all.
That differs from country to country in Northeast Asia. For Japan, I think the U.S. and Japan may have more common in talking about China when it comes to the rise of China and its implication for the region, like the maritime dispute between China and Japan, Taiwan issue, South China Sea issue, and the like. But for South Korea, I guess China is not really their primary concern. Their primary concern is relations with DPRK. So in that regard, China actually can play, as it did in the past, a constructive role. For Japan and for South Korea, they have somewhat different perspective on China, and that will shape the agenda of the 2+2 meeting with the United States.
And Mr. Russell, what's likely to be the flavor in those talks, for example, with South Korea and with Japan from Washington's perspective, current Washington?
The significance of the visit in part is that it makes good on Joe Biden's promise that he was going to consult partners and allies before acting, before making the decisions. So to say that the meetings are about China or about North Korea, I think are misleading. There'll be an affirmative agenda. What is it that the United States and Japan, the United States and Korea, and frankly, trilateral, these three close partners and allies, are trying to build in the region? What is it that they're trying to achieve, and what do they have to do in order to advance those goals?
That's, of course, one of those important layers. The other important layer is what's going to happen in Anchorage. What is on the agenda?
Well, look, I think that it's a very constructive sign that the two most senior national security officials on both sides, on the Chinese side and on the American side, are going to sit down together. I think it's positive. It's positive that they already know each other. You know, this is an asset. I would think of this meeting as a chance to begin a strategic discussion of the respective worldviews of the two leaders of the two sides, the priorities of each side. This is a chance to explain. It's a chance to listen. I don't think it's a negotiation that's going to be delving into the toughest of problems and getting answers. I think it's more of an exploration of the issues, of the positions. And look, I know Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan very well. They are good listeners. They can do more than talk. And I also know Yang Jiechi and Wang Yi quite well. I hope that they won't just recite official talking points. I hope they'll be candid in explaining what the thinking is in Beijing. And of course, the goal is for both sides to listen to each other, not to argue with each other.
Professor Wu, your take, and what are the topics on the agenda from China's perspective? What can be discussed? What can be listened to?
Specifically, I think first they will talk about the issues, either the trade and economic issues or other political issues. And both sides will express their opinions about their position and also the kind of red lines on those issues. But I don't think they are going to solve these issues. They are going to have a very candid exchange of views on those difficult issues. Secondly, both sides are expected to somehow work out a roadmap for this relationship. What are we going to do down the road from now to the end of this year? So if they can, that should be a very positive signal coming out of this meeting. The third is that I hope that both sides can make some progress on what we call the low-hanging fruits. For example, we agree, both sides would agree to cooperate on dealing with climate change, fighting COVID-19, facilitating people-to-people exchanges. So these are not highly controversial issues on both sides, and it's easier for both sides to reach agreement. If they can come up with these agreements, that will also again send a positive signal for the future relations.
Ms. Lim, how important is it for Seoul at least, to see Beijing and Washington in direct talk and consult their agenda. What does it mean for Seoul?
Oh, it means a lot, as it does have a tremendously important meanings. So as long as the two superpowers can meet each other and can have constructive dialogues, which is definitely a good sign, especially for South Korea-like country. Of course, we have a security military alliance relationship with the US, but at the same time, China is number one trade partner for us. So as long as we have multi-dimensional situations, I think all Korean people are looking forward to a more constructive dialogues between Beijing and Washington, and Washington and Beijing.
$1.9 trillion that has already been passed by the U.S. Congress. Unprecedented, of course, the number and also the way it is going to be used. Meanwhile, China just held its annual political season, in which some of the most difficult and probably challenging issues that needs to have good international communications have just been done. Of course, there were different voices coming from parts of the world suggesting whether they agree with that or not. China believes it is internal affairs. But anyway, means both have, in a way, finished some of the most important agendas they have in mind for their domestic plan. Now, here's the thing. Whether they will be able to focus on their common ground as a result of this.
There is an interesting symmetry, though, Tianwei, in terms of the domestic agenda and the calendar for both Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. In July, the party will celebrate its 100th anniversary. Next February, Beijing will host the Winter Olympics. And then at the end of next year, of course, is the all-important 20th Party Congress. That's a major political series of milestones on the Chinese side. On the American side, of course, we have a new president who's getting started, who is committed to a program of domestic renewal. Certainly, the first cycle will run until the U.S. midterm elections in November of 2022. The same time as the 20th Party Congress. So there's a symmetry also on the issues. You know, Xi Jinping talks about the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, and that's exactly what Joe Biden has promised. American renewal, to make America more competitive. And that means dealing effectively with COVID. It means getting the U.S. economy back into high gear. It means addressing some of the serious social issues that have gone unresolved. Investing in research and development infrastructure. So here again, we see a certain amount of parallelism. So I think, you know, to be optimistic here, you can see that there is space for the kind of healthy competition that can bring out the best in both sides, right? The emergence of China as a peer competitor has been a wake-up call for America. Now, the way that Donald Trump responded to that wake-up call was very ineffective, but there's reason to believe that the way that the Biden administration is signaling that it's going to compete could be a very healthy and very productive form of competition, could be very effective.
Professor Wu, let me go to the real expert like you to help us understand how is Beijing looking at this stage, the nature of this relationship between China and the United States. Earlier, the word cooperation has been very much emphasized. Then, during the annual press conference by the Chinese Foreign Minister, State Councilor Wang Yi, he also mentioned several words, both competition and cooperation. And he said, of course, they're not going to the conflict and rivalry. And then we also see Mr. Blinken, the Secretary of State, mentioned in his latest speech about this relationship, he used all these words, cooperation, competition, rivalry, and everything. So, so it seems that both are, you know, massaging the messages while at the same time trying to figure out really what's going on and what can be the nature.
When we talk about China-U.S. relations, there's always a challenge telling the difference between rhetoric and policy and practice.
Like that.
In rhetoric, it's easy to define the nature of this relationship. It's going to be a very competitive relationship with both confrontational and cooperative dimensions. So kind of like what Tony Blinken mentioned. For the Chinese side, like it or not, we have to acknowledge, we have to recognize, we have to accept that strategic competition between two countries is going to be a long-term and even dominant phenomenon in this relationship. But at the same time, China also wants to make sure competition is benign, is manageable, is controllable. And also, in spite of competition, we should be able to cooperate as much as possible.
Right.
But now, I think the real issue is as a policy issue, as is at the practical level. Now, as we are going to move down the road in this relationship, where are the priorities for this relationship?
Right.
Where are the areas we should compete? Where are the areas we should cooperate? And what's the percentage of these two different denominators? I think neither side have a clear mind about this roadmap, to say the least, of a consensus on the issue. So my hope is that after the 2+2 meeting between China and the United States, we come up with an understanding or consensus.
How much difference that would make when you know a country compared to when you don't know a country? How much it would make if we start from the young people goodwill?
Well, Tenwei, thank you. I'm a huge believer in the importance of nurturing people-to-people connections, particularly among young people, and particularly involving exchange programs and language learning programs, because it gives a very revealing window into another culture, and it makes it that much harder for negative stereotypes about the other to take hold. As a diplomat, I used to describe the people-to-people network, not only students and academics, but business people and local government officials and sports figures, et cetera, as a safety net under the tightrope that government officials and policymakers, leaders walk. If they fall off and things go badly in the relationship, you want to have this net, this safety net of strong people-to-people connections to keep the relationship from hitting the ground. However, even after decades of close exchanges between the United States and China, we found that this safety net got ripped apart by serious concerns on both sides about the other's behavior.
Ms. Lim, even though you're not talking about China-U.S. relations, but I'm sure you are a very ardent observer.
Yeah, I visited again to China many times, and I gave some special lecture to the Chinese young students too. I saw lots of all this, how would you say, this passion to learn about and to know more about American culture or American politics from the Chinese young people. The other way around too. I was teaching politics, East Asian politics to the American students. They also want to learn more about, again, the Asia, China as well. But as Mr. Russell said, of course, it creates a, how would you say, very good ground for the relationship, but sadly, it might not be really the sufficient or the determining factor whenever we see the frictions or overall competitions between the two. So understanding better is, I think, a good thing.
Professor Wu, final thoughts also from you about that.
I spent many years doing my research in the United States. I benefited a lot, and I have always tried to share with my students at Fudan University my observation of the United States. And also, when we talk to the Chinese students who come back from studying in the United States, or to the American students who spend some time in China, one important thing is that they have become more nuanced, more sophisticated in understanding the other country. In the world of Daniel Russell, they are less stereotyped in thinking about the other side. So that is very much different from the information you get from media. So yes, people-to-people exchanges cannot solve all the problems. But think about if we do not have this kind of people-to-people exchanges, especially among the younger generation, I think that will be a disaster for the future of this very important relationship.